another episode of Cops and Cons. I'm Dave Dowling, your host, along with my co-host, Jim Wethington, Detective Jim Wethington. Hi, Jim.
Hello there.
Good to have you back. Good to be back. We're going to get into some stuff this week. We're going to talk a little bit, some updates on things going around our neck of the woods. One being the prosecuting attorney here in St. Louis has stepped down, Kim Gardner, and a lot of people are happy about that. She hasn't actually quit yet, but we're going to talk a little about that since we've been talking about it. We're going to talk a little bit about the changing drug game, maybe the difference from my time as to what's going on these days and the difference in penalties and how it's policed. And we're going to talk a little bit about Richard Glossip in Oklahoma, who I believe is not guilty of murder. And they're talking about putting him to death in 2 weeks on May 18th. So I'm very hopeful that enough people can get behind him and get him exonerated and get him home. And then we're going to talk a little bit, all this in about an hour, about Jesse McFadden, who was a convicted rapist who got out and had pending sex charges and was still out on the street and ended up killing his wife and her children and 2 other children, and I think a total of 6 or 7 altogether. We're going to talk about the dangers of dating ex-cons like myself, I guess. I mean, I came right out and got married, but those are the things we're going to talk about. But I think we'll jump in and start off and talking a little bit about the changing drug game. I think that's more along your path there, JW.
A little bit. I know while you were locked up, a lot of different things changed. Heroin's a big thing now. It's not even heroin; it's more fentanyl anymore.
Yeah, when I was crumbing up and younger and drugs, the only people that did like heroin were like old ex-cons. You didn't really know anybody, at least around my group, that did it. But I came home and the world is inundated.
Oh, it's everywhere.
Of course, it was like that when I was in prison also.
Yeah, and crack cocaine's kind of off the scene, which is something because those are really interesting people. The crackhead, it's like a dying breed. The last of the Mohicans out there, still hanging
Right.
on to the crack game.
Right. And one thing I noticed, and we talked about this before we started recording here, was like when I drive around the city, back when I was younger, involved in drugs, you would see people out on the corners selling drugs.
Yeah.
Just
Open air sales.
But you don't really see that anymore. And I don't know if that's because of police presence more, or if it's just the danger of the game, or both. I don't know.
Well, there was the jump out boys trend for a long time, and that was the police officers that would literally jump out on people on the corners. And with that kind of hanging over, the police don't have enough manpower to do that anymore, but they've just changed their trends. People are mobile now. They used to not be as mobile as they were back then. Police would chase you. So now the dope man drives his car around, serves people up. They'll start like a dope train in the city where they'll get on a burner phone and get about 8 cars together, get them in an alley and serve them up real quick. But they do that because they can run from the police. Back in the day, it was easier to get away from the police on foot. The police would chase you in a car till the wheels fell off. But now people can run from the police, and if they don't have a real reason to, the police won't chase you. I think that's part of it, and the dangers of sitting on the corner getting shot at.
One thing, and I didn't mention it there in the intro, was this trend of stolen cars. And I drive a tow truck part-time, and the trend of stolen cars over the summer with the Kias and the Hyundais was unbelievable. Like if I towed 10 cars in a day, 7 of them were stolen Kias or Hyundais. I mean, every day. And they were using those cars, I'm sure, to commit more crimes. Did you run into a lot of that? Do you run into a lot of that today?
Still? Oh, yeah. We went up 30.
And is it part of the drug game?
The stolen Kias is more of just young kids being idiots and stealing cars because they can and joyriding. It's almost obnoxious how unorganized these Kia boys are that are just stealing a car to go steal another car. Here's what's going on with that trend. And I have a Kia, so I put the club on it. And I'm curious how many of those ended up with bullet holes in them. You saw some with bullet holes in them, I'm sure.
Oh, I've seen quite a few with bullet holes in them.
So they're using them for
just towing them and finding them down in the city.
They're using them for crimes. Don't get me wrong, but what's really going on is, speaking of trends, we'll go into a different crime trend, but it's all relevant. for me in this industry, it's neat to watch the crime trends because you got to stay ahead of them or at least keep up with them. But when Missouri changed the concealed carry law, people started carrying guns. When it wasn't, you didn't have to have a license to carry a gun. Pretty much, you're an American, you live in Missouri, you can have a gun, if you're 18 or over. Now, the law is a little different, but pretty much if you're 18 and over, the police don't really have a recourse if you have a firearm. If it's legal, it's not stolen, you're legal. Well, people are leaving them in their unlocked cars. So a bad guy, and there used to be a time when only about 7 groups of people in a region in the St. Louis area would be out breaking into cars. Now I have no idea what that number is. It's not 7 little groups anymore. It's 20.
No.
And they're getting guns. They're getting into unlocked
Right.
cars and they're getting guns. And if there's keys in there, they'll steal the car for no real reason other than to go to another neighborhood and steal more cars. And so when they
Right.
found out about whatever this TikTok video was, well, might as well start stealing Kias too. So that's where that big spike came up. But they were already breaking into cars because they could break into a bunch of unlocked cars and easily come down with 3 or 4 guns in a night.
And find
Yeah, and that's a
firearms.
pretty good night for a small group of people. That's why they're doing it. That's where
Right.
that trend came from.
That's crazy. Now, I myself, when I was younger, I never carried a gun. I don't carry one now, of course. I'm a convicted felon. I can't carry a firearm. I feel kind of naked out there, I'll be honest with you, knowing so many people are carrying weapons. And here I am
Right.
with a penknife.
Personality.
Used to open boxes at work. Right. I'm just hoping to be like, hey, just take the stuff. Don't kill an old guy. Just go ahead and have it.
I'm likable.
If you steal my car, yeah, don't get caught with it, okay? Because I don't want it back. Just keep it. I'm insured. Go park it somewhere for at least 30 days so I can, get another one.
Yeah, claim it on insurance.
All right, something. Don't kill me over that sucker. I owe too much on it to get to die over it too. But back to the drug thing, which was really where we started. I think of just the different trends and stuff. The things happening today and they were happening in prison too. Like when I was in Moberly Correctional Center, there was like 1 week where like 8 guys I knew died from fentanyl overdose. You'd walk out in the yard and you see guys would just fall over on the benches and stuff. And, I would want to keep my distance because if you're next to somebody who dies, you'll go under investigation, and even though I didn't use any drugs in prison, I knew about them. Of course, you know about them. And people say, well, where do they come in? How do they come in? They come in however you could think. I mean, we had dog programs. People would donate toys. Well, one time they opened up all the toys and all the toys were filled with dope,
Really?
And then, of course, sometimes, unfortunately, COs and staff members would bring them in. And other times it'd come on visits. And then the visits thing wasn't as big at the end there because the visits were getting real tough on watching the visits. But one trend that happened was when the K2 started happening. Like you don't see too many people in prison with marijuana
because you can't smoke it without smelling.
Right. I was under the impression when I first heard of K2 there was some kind of synthetic marijuana. Well, that's not really the case. It's just a chemical that they sprayed on stuff that looked like marijuana. So what they did was just
that makes you go crazy.
That makes you go crazy out your mind. So they would just spray it on the envelopes and then mail you a letter. And then they would cut the envelopes into strips and sell the strips. And then they would smoke the paper and go literally a lot of them out of their mind. I saw guys catch new cases over stuff they did while they were blacked out on K2, like serious cases, and it was a situation like in the wings that made the wings more dangerous. So I didn't like it, but it's not a lot you can do about it. I didn't like, I just tried to put peer pressure on people not to do it, but you know how that works. And guys who weren't going to do it anyway don't do it, and the guys who want to do it just sneak around and do it and lie to you, but it makes everything more dangerous, drugs like that, and then meth was the other big thing in prison, which I never really understood because why you want to be up 5 days in prison? I never understood that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if meth was a thing in prison.
It was come and go, but
I guess
everything gets in there, but it's very expensive. And even more dangerous than that is like they'll shoot it, but they might have one needle for a wing full of 40 guys that are using it. So you might have 20 to 40 guys passing around and using the same syringe. Right. And rinsing it out with powdered bleach, which I don't know how effective that could possibly be, but it was a pretty gross scene, some of them practicing some pretty unsafe sexual habits also, so it's what you call a real high risk group.
I would say
Yeah,
so.
very high risk group, and it really turned me off to the whole drug scene. I can tell you that, But I personally have never used any needles or
Yeah.
of that. I was on cocaine when I was younger, and that's why I got in trouble. It was part of the reason I got in trouble. I mean, it was kind of like crime fuel for me. But once I got locked up for these cases, I got off that forever, and thank God. I mean, it did me a big service. But I see guys today and being hooked on something physically. See, I've never been hooked on anything physically. So I see different areas taking different stances. Some of them saying, well, just let them do it. Well, I don't know. What do you think about that?
That can be dangerous too in other ways. I mean, you talk about enabling it. I know society is trying their best to circumvent what they're calling a humanitarian crisis, and it's an epidemic. There was a $13 billion lawsuit, I think, either last year or the year before, that Walgreens, Walmart, and CVS all had to pay because of their part in the opioid epidemic. But the whole idea, you can't let people do that. So there is what an amazing thing to say. I didn't mean to oversimplify it, but there are two things I've seen out there, two patterns that I found rather disturbing. One was the girlfriend. I had an informant who she bought dope for her boyfriend, and it was heroin, because she thought that she was keeping him safe because she would go and find the safe dealers. In her mind, she thought she was saving him by bringing in the safest dope possible for him. He ultimately ended up overdosing. And then she obviously felt terrible because she thought she was doing right by him when ultimately she wasn't. I haven't seen her in years, and she was pretty depressed the last time I
Yeah,
saw her.
it's a
So,
terrible thing. I had a little cousin who overdosed and died, 25 years old, a Marine veteran, came home. He got hooked on it over there, though, and came home still on it and over in Afghanistan. And he came home and, you know, he got a bad hit or took too much, whatever it is, and, died at 25. And I just known so many people to die, and I just don't remember ever dealing with such a large amount of young people, dying, or such a large amount of young people standing in the street begging money.
oh yeah, well there was
That was shocking to me when I came home, seeing so many young men just standing in the middle of the street asking for money. I mean, you didn't really see a lot of, I mean, we always have had homeless people around, but not in droves.
There was a lawsuit here in the Eastern District of Missouri where a homeless guy that was begging won a lawsuit, a huge lawsuit from St. Louis County. And the judge, his argument for the panhandler was, well, how is it any different than the firemen out there with their boots or the old newsboys selling their paper? Which is an interesting twist from the judge. But we had over 100,000 overdoses documented by the CDC in 2021. Now, the numbers aren't in yet for last year, but I
For
imagine
what
it's
area is this? The whole
the
country
whole
or
country in the
what we
US. I would think that's
yeah.
going to mirror that, relatively close. I can't imagine it won't.
What about your neck of the woods? What about like your area? How often do you get calls for overdoses roughly? Daily?
See, the thing is, it gets distorted. The calls get distorted. So if you were just to run a computer data search in any police department, the numbers are always going to be off because it could come in as a sick case. It gets categorized different. But
Mm.
yeah, we see a lot of overdoses. Personally, I'm around an overdose. Now, I was an office mouse for a while, but I'm around some sort of an overdose every 2-3 weeks, and sometimes if it's a bad batch out there, it's even worse. Now, the scary thing about a bad batch is when people hear that It's not heroin anymore, by the way. Sometimes it's just straight
Right.
fentanyl. And these
Right.
people aren't chemists. They don't know what's a safe amount and what isn't. If they find out somebody's got the killer stuff, they will seek out that dealer, which I think is just it's unfathomable for me. But there is
Yeah.
another trend going back to the second odd trend I see, other than the girlfriend that buys the dope for the boyfriend. There's so much access to Narcan now, which is the blocker, the sensory blocker for an overdose
Right.
person, heroin overdose or an opioid overdose, that they now have parties called Lazarus parties,
Lazarus
where
parties.
people are basically the Jesus's friend that Jesus brought back from the dead.
Oh, right. Right.
So that's where the name comes from. So they have there's shepherds at the party that aren't doing the drugs, like the girlfriend that's just there to take care of her boyfriend, and then their job is to administer Narcan to anyone that overdoses at these parties. I think that's going too far. For me, that's just going a little
They're
too
really
far.
giving the word party, the name party, a bad name.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, party,
but yeah,
party of involving too much dying just seems like a real kind of cultish death cult party. I don't know. It's a scary thing to me.
that's a huge trend that is disturbing.
And people driving under the influence of it too and nodding out. One night I was driving my tow truck and I got a call to go on Highway 55 and pick up a Ford Explorer. Well, it was ice raining out. I mean, it was going. It was a bad night. So, pretty dangerous. So I go up there, I get up on the highway, I find the truck, I pull in front of it, I jump out, run up to the window, and I see the guy sitting in the front seat, and I bang on the window, hey, come on, and he's not moving. So I bang on the window, I'm looking at him, but there's kind of like rain and ice on the windshield, on the windows. So I open the door, and he's got a needle in his arm. He's about 40 something years old, at least that's what he looked like. And he's unconscious. He's not moving. He's not responding at all. So I'm like, shh. I dial 911 after quite a big fiasco dealing with 911 because they were like, you need to take him out of the truck, sir, and apply CPR. I said, ma'am, I'm on the side of a highway
In an ice
in
storm.
an ice
Right.
storm. I'm not a doctor. I'm not reaching in here. I don't know what's in here. I'm not doing that. I am empathetic and I'm calling, but I'm not
Right.
doing that. Okay. And some people I wouldn't know what to do. And no, I'm just not doing it. So the ambulance shows up. No police
And
even.
then how about me getting sued?
Right. So no police even show up. The ambulance shows up. They take him out of the truck, take him to the back of the ambulance. I'm waiting kind of to see what's going to happen here. I could have just left, I mean, obviously, I don't have to do this tow if this guy's dead.
Right. Who's going to pay me?
Right. Well, that's another thing. That's the story goes on. So here he comes walking out of the back of the ambulance, kind of stumbling out. Dude, are you all right? He's like, oh, man, thank you. Thanks for not calling the police. I'm like, oh, well, I did, call the police, but they didn't come. But I mean, I don't know who I was calling, but
You're
whatever.
welcome.
Right. Yeah, you're welcome. I said, you still want your truck towed? Yeah, I need to have my truck towed. I said, well, go sit in my truck, I guess. So I load the truck up.
And don't touch nothing.
Don't touch nothing. So I take the truck over to where he lives over in the city and I pull up to drop it off and I say, well, that's going to be $150. That's how much it costs. I've been sitting here for an hour waiting for you to come back to life and it's $150. So he gives me a credit card. It's got like $13 on it. I said, look, though, there's $13. You owe me 137 more. He's like, well, can I just bring it up to you tomorrow? I'm like, no, you can't. You can't just bring it to me tomorrow. You can come get your truck tomorrow, or you can go inside.
You don't seem trustworthy, sir.
Right. Just your credit line right now is looking kind of shaky,
Based on what I know about addicts and heroin,
Right.
you may
So,
not have the other 137.
right. I'm feeling a little shaky about this, you getting money tonight. So I said, hey, you better. He says, well, you're not taking my truck. I said, hey, look, if you don't give me $150, I promise you I'm taking this truck. Cussed me out a little bit. He said, wait right here. I'll be right back. I'll go in the house and get it. So I'm like, all right, I'll give you 5 minutes. So he comes out with two other guys, even scrawnier and weaker than looking than him. I'm kind of a big guy.
Yeah, and you can handle yourself.
I got a face for radio, but I'm kind of a big guy, So he comes around and like, and one of his little skinny friends is like, "I'm gonna tell you right now, partner, you're not taking this truck." I said, "Look, dude, step away from my truck. I'm taking this truck. This truck ain't coming off here." So the guy, I just saved his life. He comes up and tries to pull my truck door open. So instead of pulling the door back, I just pushed it into him, shoved him on the ground,
Right.
and got out. And I said, "Hey, look, I saved your life 15 minutes ago, and now I'm getting ready to beat your ass. You know what I mean? Now step away from the truck, come with the money tomorrow." I threw a business card at him, and you can get your truck. So I took the truck back to the lot and impounded it, and that's where it's at today. 6 months later, it's
Oh yeah.
still there. Yeah, I mean, he's lost the truck. I mean,
That's why the
obviously.
little guy wanted the truck.
Right. I mean, I was like, dude, what the shit? I just saved you. Now I got to hit you with this thing. Come on, man. But nothing came of it, and I got paid for the tow. That's the happy ending of the story.
So they'll salvage title that thing eventually.
Yeah, they savage title it. Just he'll never be able to pay it, and it might be gone by now. I only work weekends doing that anymore. I don't remember if I even seen it on the lot, but it's been a while. But you just see crazy stuff, but that's any city, anywhere. But that was my experience with OD. So they told me, well, you need to start carrying Narcan in your tow truck. And I'm like, nah, I'm not gonna. I don't know why. I don't know how to use it. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to get involved. I know that might sound callous. You could save a life. I know I probably could. Maybe I could have saved, but I don't like to stop. It's already kind of spooky out there in the city, at night, when I'm towing cars, stolen Kias off the side of Highway 55. It's a little nerve wracking. Not looking to really save lives. I'm looking to make an extra hundred
I'm
bucks.
not trying to do it. Yeah, I'm not spraying Narcan
The
up.
life
No.
I'm saving tonight is my own, I mean, for
Well, what are
real.
the odds that you're going to deal with that again anyway? I mean, actually, probably pretty decent, but
Right. I don't know, man.
there you have no policy, or you're
No,
not required to carry Narcan. I don't.
no.
And then what if you did have it and then something happened
That's
and
what
you
I
didn't?
mean.
I'm always worried about the liability of taking the action. Now, in my job, I just got to go with it on good faith.
Right. And how do I know they're overdosed? Maybe they had a stroke and I'm killing them with this stuff. I don't know what this stuff is either.
Right.
But there's been times like I was driving one day and I seen a guy just laying on the ground, like just laying there on the ground. And he didn't look like a typical homeless person, with really dirty clothes or nothing. I was like, is this guy just shot? And I'm like, dude, don't get involved. And I couldn't help it. I just said, hell with it. I jumped out and went over there and kind of pushed him. I said, hey, are you all right? And he sat up. He's like, damn, where am I? I'm like, well, you're on the side of Jefferson right now. Kind of a busy street to be sleeping on.
Right.
He just got up and looked at me like I was trying to steal something and took off. So I was like, all right, well, I did what I could.
Good luck.
Right. So I don't know. You got people out here standing in the streets getting run over by cars too.
Well, they'll stagger in the street because
Man, they stand right there next to you, like right where you pull up. I'm like, dude, you know, I don't want to run you over, but I don't want you that close to my window either because I don't know what you're doing.
yeah, just heroin's the main drug out here for sure.
Right.
Crack's kind of off. Meth's an interesting tale, but we might get into that another time. The way that's evolved from the red phosphorus when we were young and people were doing it. I remember. I've never.
Well, it was kind of what they called a biker drug back then.
Yeah, I never did anything remotely close to that. But I saw it, and I saw it was pink, and I was like, "You're putting what in your body?"
Right.
You know,
Right. Pink. Yeah, like dish soap.
yeah.
Well, what I don't understand is if you can cook it right here, JW, if you can make it right here, if I could make this stuff in my home, why would I need some from Mexico? Like, why would Mexico be making so much money if guys can cook it here? What's the,
People used to make it here for years, and it used to be the big anhydrous cooks. Back, I mean, what, 25 years ago when it really hit the scene, I guess I was just getting out of high school. So that's like 30 years ago, I guess now, 30 something years ago. And it was that big anhydrous cook. It was called a cold cook, and you had to have a legit setup to cook that.
anhydrous ammonia, right?
Yeah, then people would steal it from the farms, and if something went wrong at the tank, it would dry out and immediately dehydrate your lungs. and people would die trying to steal anhydrous just because it sucks all the moisture out of your lungs. That trend changed because law enforcement caught up to it, started to find the precursors, and you could smell an anhydrous cook. So you had to cook out in the middle of nowhere, because if you tried to cook in a neighborhood, we could just drive around and find them. We did it all the time. So
Right.
after a while, I guess in 2006, right around there was a new federal law passed where you couldn't buy more than 3.6 grams a day, which is basically more than one box a day of Sudafed or
Uh,
something with
what's the name of it?
pseudoephedrine.
Ephedrine.
Pseudoephedrine,
Pseudoephedrine.
yeah, yeah, the active ingredient, and or more than 9 grams a month. So in 2006, they changed this law, but people kept making pretty big cooks. And about a year later, law enforcement went out, and this was before it was all digitized, and they would literally have log books at these stores. And myself and some other investigators in the area started reading off these logs, right? And we were popping people for these federal crimes left and right, referring to the feds. It was
If you had bought too much.
if you had bought too much, and you could always track down to the.
Now, would that be the only thing that you could I mean, if somebody bought too much, would you need other evidence to get them, or is that enough?
Eventually, it changed to where you had to have corpus delicti, which is like the body of the evidence. But usually, you caught them with meth too once you went to do it, and everybody was ratting on each other left and right. So initially, it was
I'm
just
sure.
you had the
That
logs.
part of the drug game hasn't changed, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
you had the logs, you had the confession, you had your case. But later on, it changed where you know how they were doing a lot of the crack stuff in the 90s, 5 grams of crack, which is probably what stamped out crack quite a
Right.
bit. If you had 5 grams or
Yeah.
more, that was a federal case. Well, this is 10 years later, right? It was the early 2000s, and meth was like that, where they lowered the prosecution level for the feds. And so once that happened, people stopped doing these big cooks, right? Because they could only buy so much. And then we were also popping people for buying the pseudoephedrine, and people were telling on cooks. I'm going to tell you, man, we were killing it. We had all the snitches in the world, man, and we were popping it. We were really getting a lot of work done. So we stamped that out,
Yeah.
right?
I saw a lot of guys get big time for that. Big time for small not that big amounts of dope. I saw a lot of guys get like I had one friend of mine, they found his thumbprint on a soda bottle in a cookhouse and he got 25 years because of his past
I was
record.
going to say that had to hit.
You
Yeah.
know, he took it to trial and lost. Yeah, it was because of his past record. Now, he says that he wasn't over there. Maybe, I don't know. You know, he ended up, they kind of overturned the law where it was a non parolable and made it parolable so that a lot of those guys that by that time, a lot of them had done
Yeah.
20 years, you know, like a bunch of time, you know.
It flooded the market
And
as far as the
so,
prison system.
yeah,
A lot of meth people were going into the prison system then.
yeah,
And so it broke the back of the big cooks, right? The cold cooks. And so it turned into a bunch of small cooks, and they started doing what's called shake and bakes and one pot cooks. And that really became the trend probably from about 2008 until around 2012 or 13. And those people were making it was no longer a meth lab. It was kind of funny. We kept wanting to call it a meth lab when we get one, but it's like you're talking, it's just a bottle of dope. People would make it in a soda bottle. They'd put one box.
right. Of cold medicine.
Yeah, it was a
Or what
process.
would they put on the cold I mean, I guess we don't want to give a tutorial on drug processing, but
Let's say it was a process, and when the process was over,
right.
and they poured all the liquid out through these filters, and coffee filters was one of the main things that tools
Just
you needed
drying
on
it
there.
out to get to the rocks that were left over, I'm guessing, or whatever the
Yeah,
crumbles that were.
a little bit more to it, but yeah, that's not what this is about. So they pour it through the filters, they get it. There's a couple final steps, but they didn't have that much dope, but they were catching
Right.
manufacturing cases.
Right. That was some of the guys I knew.
You're catching a manufacturing case for a one box cook, is what it's called,
Right.
for 3 grams, maybe 3.5 if you're really good at getting a yield.
Right.
Uh,
An 8 ball,
yeah.
what have you.
And then after that, people stopped wanting to buy pseudoephedrine. We really did a really good case where we indicted 29 people on pseudoephedrine case and named a total of 81 with indicted conspirators and unindicted co-conspirators. And in the St. Louis County area, it really broke the back of the one pot cook.
Right.
At the same time, the Mexicans started pushing ice into the area. So it's like you can't win, right?
Right.
So we finally break the cooks in the area, break up this big conglomerate, and the Mexicans start pushing their ice into the area because there was a void.
So what's the difference? Is there a difference between ice and meth? I mean, is it the same thing? Is ice meth?
There's a Mexican manufactured methamphetamine. That's a mouthful. Is different than just that is ice. Really, that shards of ice. They're made in huge super labs in the jungles. They're just huge. So they're made in the old style of the cold cook, where it's a big super lab. So that ice is a lot more pure than the stuff the guy's pulling out of his microwave or off a heating plate
Right.
in a hotel room.
Right.
And that's got a bunch of junk in it. So that first method was coming in, and a lot of the method still comes in. My partner and I were the first people to present a 100% pure meth to the U.S. Attorney's Office, where we did a buy, and it was all a spin-off of that other case, but 100% pure meth, and that was right out of Mexico. And here's the interesting part of the trend. The Colombians had made deals with the Mexican cartels to smuggle their cocaine up from South America. But the war at the border with Mexican cartels getting such an ugly, well-documented war, the Colombians decided to start moving their own cocaine again, right? So because of that, the Mexicans were out a lot of money, the cartels. Well, in order to bridge that gap, they started making and forcing the meth on people that were taking their coke or their weed out. And so if you wanted 500 pounds of marijuana, you got to sell this 20 pounds of meth too. So that hit the market, and that's how we now have so much ice now, as opposed to these homegrown meth.
Right. Well, it's interesting to me how the extremes of the drugs match almost the political climate. Like you have two major drugs right now, meth and fentanyl. One knocks you all the way out, the other will keep you up forever and promote a psychotic kind of state from what I see in people, because I do know people. I'm not here in the world. I work. And you see just these extremes in the behaviors and what it does to people. And it's almost like the political climate is extreme on both sides. You get these super right is pushing the super left. The more they go left, the more and more people want to come right and come back left. And the same with the drugs. They go way up, want to come back down. And it's, I don't know, it's just where do they go from here? I mean, is the answer lock up more of them or more treatment? Which, look, I love treatment programs. My life was saved by treatment programs, and help from other individuals to get off drugs, etc. But when I see the mass treatment programs thing going, and I see a lot of fraud, where they're just warehousing people in garages, getting insurance checks, and people really not getting any help.
Yeah, they're making believe.
And I hate to be the hard case on the other side to say the best help I ever got was when they locked my ass up and said, pay for your problem.
Yeah.
And that woke me up. Now, I don't want to be a lock everybody up kind of guy, but at some point we do have to have a society out here. I mean, we do have to be able to go to the store. I mean, we can't just let the whole thing fall apart. You can't, I mean, I guess I lean right, but I also have a lot of compassion for addicts and people with mental illness. But a lot of the mental illness is caused by the addiction. A lot of the addiction is caused by the uncontrolled flow of the stuff coming in, and then the lack of consequences.
Yeah, the open borders not helping.
Right, the lack of consequences for being caught.
Yeah.
And one thing, and I say it all the time, that an addict and a criminal really understands is consequences. Get them consequences. They give you time to get that moment of clarity you need and start thinking about reality. Reality is not just whatever a politician says it is or whatever way you lean. Reality is reality, and it never changes.
Yes.
So if you can live in fantasy worlds and pretend like things are like this and well, that's not reality. Reality is people are going to keep trying to get away with whatever they can get away with until they're made to stop. And That's where law enforcement comes in. That's what prisons are for. My big thing is make prisons and correctional facilities. I think people sitting warehoused in prisons is foolishness. There has to be people doing things. Jobs have to be available for them. And I saw something on, I don't know if it was TikTok or whatever. Well, prison work is slave labor. Well, you surrendered your rights when you took somebody else's rights. You break the law, you surrender your rights, and you're lucky to be doing anything. We're going to give you enough money to live. Like when I was there, I did get some good jobs. I worked myself up into working on computers, and I read books onto MP3 players and stuff like that for the blind. And there was factories, and you could work and you could make 100, 150 a month, which is all you need to live there because they're paying your rent. You got your light bill covered, all this stuff. And then you can attend classes and stuff,
All the amenities.
all the amenities. Now, if you're going to be out in population and enjoying the things of population, well, then you have to do the stuff I mean, that's like the training ground for coming home. And it was a good training ground for me because it built structure. But I think there's just too many people. I think that there should be, of course, medical care, da 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 da. But when you're paying people $14 an hour to do a really dangerous job, who do you think you're getting? I mean, who do you think you're getting?
Right. The kind of guy that'll bring dope into the prison.
Well, I mean, who do you think you're getting in there? I remember at one point being in the wing, and there was two COs working the wing of 100 guys, and they were both 60-plus-year-old women. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
basically at that point, me and the other leaders of the wing are the real police of the wing at that point, because
Yeah, if cracks off, they're not doing anything.
what are they going to do? I felt nervous for them.
Yeah.
Like I felt nervous for them. Like it's crazy.
Like it was your job to protect them at that point.
Well, right. I don't want anything to happen to an old lady just because I'm in prison doesn't mean I'm an animal, and most guys aren't. Most guys have sobered up and are ready to get their lives back on, pay their bill, and go home.
Right.
And that's what most guys do. But then there's some that don't. And that kind of segues me into another thing I wanted to talk about. And I said at the beginning was this guy, Jesse, what was his name again?
McFadden, I think.
Jesse McFadden, who was a convicted sex offender, got 20 years for first degree rape in Oklahoma, gets out early on parole. Some girl met him through there's ways to meet inmates, pen pal things and stuff like that. Not real bad against that.
Back of a rock and roll magazine.
All that kind of stuff, easy rider, I don't know if it's really an easy rider, but I mean, magazines and stuff, and your friend, people meet people that are locked up and they start writing them and they're lonely and the person seems nice. And a lot of times, you know what, they are. And then a lot of times they aren't. But there's a lot of things you have to take into your mind. Like, what are they in there for? Not everybody's innocent, okay? I mean, there's just a lot of people that really want to believe in the really deep goodness of everyone. And I'm not saying there isn't goodness in everyone. There probably is, but I've met some that it's hard to find. But they're also professional groomers, like they know what to say. They know how to manipulate and be sweet and talk the talk and do to do. And, even in my case, with my wife, we've known each other long before I ever went to prison.
Which helps.
Right. That makes a lot of difference. She knew me before I went there. But a lot of people are meeting strangers that they don't know that have real serious cases. So what you have to take into consideration is how long have they been removed from society? Me, it was a pretty long time. So a lot of the things I meant to be like and do when I came home, that fell a little short. You know what I mean? I still fell a little short,
Right.
because you have this image in your mind when you're in there that now you know how to do it and you know exactly what to do. But then you come out and life's rushing by and you need to pay bills and it can be overwhelming. And it was for me, but lucky I had a wonderful girl, who's my best friend, who went through some stuff with me till we got to the point where I was back acclimated to society. And now I'm like I wanted to be then, but it took a minute. It was just a lot on me.
Well, you had an
An
expectation,
expectation.
and
Well, then there's other guys though that are just straight predators. There are real predators out here. And this Jesse McFadden guy, he gets out, meets this girl. She's got young kids. And he had caught another case, which just blows my mind. It kind of takes me back to what we talked about in episode 1 about people being out on bonds who have no business being out on bonds or parole. And he caught a case for child pornography while he was in there and still got paroled. That's my understanding from what I'm reading in the press. So the day he's supposed to go to trial for these cases, well, he kills her kids, and two other kids that were just around, and himself. He just kills everybody. And God knows what he did to him. For a while, you can look it up. Anybody who's listening, look up the story. And I'm sure everyone's heard of it. Pretty big news right now, but it's scary, that. And I've known other guys, and not just that's a pretty extreme case, but ladies, careful with the sex offenders, okay? A big red flag, okay, with the sex offenders coming straight out of prison, all right? I mean, come on.
If I'm going to paint a broad brush, that's the broad brush I'm painting with.
Man, protect yourself. You got kids and stuff. This guy's talking this good game. And it's always the same. They'll say something like, oh, well, looked like she was 19. Turned out she was only 16. Yeah, well, I read the paperwork. She was 4 and she was your own daughter. So I don't know how you mixed her up. I don't know
Right.
how that got confusing to you. I don't know if she came out in a Halloween costume. You didn't recognize her. I don't know what happened there, but. Well, I mean,
Was it
seriously,
the meth and the
it's
fentanyl?
always the same thing, and it's, there's signs that I can see because I have all this experience that I know that most people who are lonely and want to meet someone nice and da da da, and give them a chance. And look, I'm all about giving a chance, but chances are earned. It's like when you get out of prison. When I got out of prison, I didn't expect everyone to welcome me with open arms and say, oh, he's better now. No, that's my responsibility to build trust in the community and to show that I'm trustworthy.
Right.
And for the rest of my life, I can't get mad if somebody really isn't feeling that. I mean, all I can do is say, well, those who do feel like they can trust me, I'm going to make them glad they did.
Right.
And those who didn't, well, there'll be no consequence to either one of us, because.
Yeah, moving on.
Right, moving on, to the next opportunity, because they're out here. You can have opportunities. You just have to have realistic expectations. But, it is dangerous. You got to be careful people you meet and date. I mean, I don't like to dog my guys out. I got a lot of friends in prison who want me to find them some. I guess they think I just know all these single girls that want to ride them and stuff. But honestly, I don't know any.
I don't. You're gonna have to source your own pen pal from prison.
Right. Right. I'm like 50. I don't know how many hot chicks I got running around me. I mean, probably more than the regular guy. I mean, my wife's got a lot of good looking friends, but but they're not interested.
But they ain't writing a guy in prison.
Right. And they're not writing any guy in prison. They don't even like the guy they got out here working, much less somebody that eats $20 a week. So
I got a question for you.
no.
Was there any indication that that woman that was murdered, was she unaware that he had caught another case? And did he kill her because it was all about to come crashing down?
Well, that's a great question that I don't know the answer to, and I don't want to speculate on that because I feel like she's a pure victim. I know she meant well. I know that this guy conned her, like a lot of them do, and she was conned, and it cost her and her whole family her life. So my prayers go to her and her family. It's a horrible thing that this demon got out. But, the question is with these guys who first-degree rape on a child, I mean, DeSantis has a solution for him down in Florida right now, which is kill him, And I don't like to get too deep into the death penalty, although personally I do support death penalty.
It's got its place.
I know a lot of people don't. And I also am an advocate for innocent projects victims. Like Richard Glossip is up for the death penalty, but the preponderance of evidence, is against it. Now, if they kill Richard Glossip here in 2 weeks.
Explain that case for us.
Okay, Richard Glossip, I guess he was in his early 20s. He worked at a hotel or a motel, and he was like the assistant manager. Well, there was a guy who worked there that was like a janitorial type guy, and then his manager. I'm sure there were other people that worked there, but these are the main 3 people of this story. So the manager gets murdered. They catch the janitorial type guy who actually committed the murder, and they knew he committed the murder, and he admitted to committing the murder, but he said, oh, Richard Glossip put me up to it. Now, Richard Glossip's never been in trouble of his life. He didn't have a lot of money and didn't really have anything to do with the manager. Like, they didn't have a bunch of beef anyway that was documented or known.
No motive.
Right, really no motive and no money. So with no money trail, no DNA evidence, no phone calls, no anything, this guy gets a regular life sentence that's parolable, and they give Richard Glossip the death penalty. And it takes me to my buddy Ryan Ferguson, who, does my other podcast, Prison Counts, with him. The evidence is ridiculous. I mean, Ryan was
convicted on
he was on a dream. I had a dream. I go, and And that's where the death penalty stuff gets a little hazy. But, I think there's ways to know for sure. You know for sure, for sure. But in this case, I might contradict myself
That's
a lot on
fine.
this
We
show
all
too.
do
So,
that. At least you're doing it in the open.
right, I go back and forth on stuff, but I hear heinous stuff against children, and I want to kill them. And then I see somebody like Richard Glossip obviously getting screwed by the system, and I want to save him. And I do. I mean, it makes me really.
Why don't you get Bill Ferguson on that one?
I have tagged Bill in some posts, so hopefully he'll look into it. I don't like to put anybody on the spot, and I hope he don't get mad at me
I'm just
for
kidding.
putting him in
Save
there.
him, Bill.
Right. I mean, he's done a
I'm
lot,
just kidding.
but he does get involved, though.
I know.
I mean, Bill does get
Yeah,
involved,
I know.
and Ryan tries to get involved when he can too. It's a lot because people come to him and us a lot with a lot of cases, and it's hard to.
Oh, yeah. And I know you pay attention to that.
It's hard to tell someone you don't believe them. Like, oh, my brother's in here, and he was set up, and he killed him. And then you look at the evidence, you're like, looks pretty good to me. You know what I mean? I think you're a very nice person, and I'm glad you're supporting him. I guess, but I don't believe him. I think you did it. I don't want to go on, and just because you think so, and another 10 people think so, I'm pretty negative. I don't believe a lot of people, but I do believe Richard Glossip. And I do believe Daniel Holtzclaw too, who's out there too, and he was a police officer that they convicted of a bunch of counts of rape, and I find it to be a little not quite as clear cut as they think, and I'll probably get some backlash for that. But I do support Daniel Holtzclaw, and I do support Richard Glossip.
The very first big true crime podcast was Serial. It was a podcast about a wrongly convicted, or at least it was not a very strong case. A kid named Adon was accused of killing his girlfriend. And that was a really big push, and that was part of that Innocence Project. And he was eventually released, I think, in the Baltimore area. I think last year or a year before.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing about it.
But that's a really interesting true crime podcast.
Now, have you personally ever came across a case, and if you don't want to answer this, you don't have to, but that you got behind? I think, what did you call it last when you were a guest on Prison Counts?
The Disagreeable Giver.
The Disagreeable Giver. Now, did you ever get behind a case and really say, I really don't believe this is the truth? I really think we got the wrong guy.
Not like at the deepest levels, just an initial investigation.
Right. Not someone who'd been convicted.
Right. I haven't been like testifying in front of the court. No, I've been very fortunate that I've spoken up, said my piece. The case usually after that takes one direction or another, and sometimes you can't use logic. You just got to follow the facts, and if the facts are not fitting your theory, we have to change off your theory. That's about as far as I've ever had to go, and that's just to convince somebody that, hey, we're gonna have to let that darling of a theory of yours go.
Right.
I had nothing to do with the Pam Huff thing.
Right.
I know some of the guys.
Yeah, I know Russ Faria. He's a good friend of mine, and
oh yeah.
Russ is a real good friend.
He's been
of mine.
on the show with you. Right?
Yeah, he's been on the show, and he's such a positive guy too. I mean, I love Russ. He's a regular blue collar guy, and he's a real decent person. He doesn't have a lot of animosity in his heart over it, except for those who purposely tried to take his life.
Yeah,
I mean, so there's been a lot of stuff about that, and we'll have Russ on this show soon, I'm sure, because he's that kind of guy.
But I've never done anything. I've never had to go down like a path like that. So
would it be difficult?
I would imagine it would be difficult. I will be going against the grain.
Yeah.
With Stacy Lannard's case, there was a detective that stayed with her throughout the whole process, and he was on the original investigation. And I know that he championed for her. I'm sure she appreciates that. But I've never had to be in one of those spots, and that's a real moral dilemma. And I would hope I do the right thing.
Right. For those of you who don't know who Stacy Lannard is, she was convicted of killing her father back in, was it 1989 or 90?
No, 91 or 92.
92. Okay. Back then, so long ago that my old brain can't remember specific numbers. But she was given life without parole. The governor gave her not a pardon, but a reprieve. And now she does real well with her life. And, and her father...
What led to the murder was some actions of her father, but there was a Lieutenant Schulte that had worked the case, and he stuck in there with her. And I know that he was chastised in the community about it. I know a lot of the officers in the area were giving him a hard time.
Right.
But in the end, the governor saw enough to commute her sentence, and
Right.
he did stick in there. But I've never had to be in that situation.
Right.
I know I'd want to look myself in the mirror after it.
Well, and it's a tough situation because when people ask you to get behind somebody they think is not guilty, you got to remember that there's a victim's family out there that thinks they're guilty. All right. And boy, you have to really convince me, I mean, really, to go up against the victim's family because, one thing I like to put out there every episode is that I'm very pro victim. A victim is someone who has no choice, and people who get hurt like that are people that had no choice, people that weren't involved in anything wrong like that. And I'm a very big victims advocate with the parents of murdered children and through the restorative justice programs. I'm big on all that.
Amen.
So I think we talked about a lot this week, JW. So I think we've
Yeah.
interesting. I want to encourage listeners to, you don't have to take my word for people's innocence or not innocence or your stance on any penalties or laws or anything. Look it up, look into it, look up Richard Glossip, read his story. He's got 2 weeks left to live. So, you could get and sign the petition. You can go to a link for that petition at www.prisoncounts.com. You can listen to our shows off of there, see our latest updates on different cases going on. And you can also send us your opinions or ideas for stories, or if you'd like to chat with us or be on the show, let us know, and we'll get a hold of you and we'll see if we want to do it.
We'll vet you.
We'll vet you, and we'll see if it sounds interesting enough for us to talk about for about an hour. All right. Well, JW, thanks for being here with me.
All right, buddy.
We'll see y'all next week or a week and a half. We're not really on a real weekly schedule, but we're about 10 days, good for 10 days, every 10 days or so. So you can get us on every platform, Apple, Spotify, etc. You can find Cops and Cons and share us, like us, tell us your friends about it, interact with us on our website through emails and on Instagram, Facebook. You can look me up personally, Dave Dowling, on Facebook, or you can look up prisoncounts.com. You can look up Prison Counts on Facebook. You can look up Cops and Cons on Facebook. Whatever you want to talk about. If you want to ask me about Ryan, where is he at? I can't tell you, but you can call and ask. And when I find out, I probably won't let you know, but when he's ready, he'll be back. So thanks everybody for listening. And,
all right.
We'll see you at count time.